This is the We Witches 3 podcast, where you will hear the opinion of 3 seasoned witches who are tired of glossy, tunnel vision, love and light accolades about serious metaphysical topics. Your hosts, Charlene, Maria Sewell, and Heather Woodworth have been practicing witches and professional psychics for over 20 years. They not only have the experience, but they have the research to back it up. So get comfortable on your brooms, grab a snack, and get ready for a wild ride.
Hi guys, we're here today with Thesesa Reed and Shaheen Miro, and we're going to be talking about tarot for troubled times today. Theresa, I know you're the tarot lady online, and you've been reading for a heck of a long time. Did you want to go over your background a little bit?
Absolutely. I've been reading tarot professionally now for 30 years. And I got started with tarot when I was a teenager. My first introduction to any of the mystical arts was through astrology, through a girlfriend's mother. And, that's how I call that my gateway. And, it was one day I was at a bookstore and I saw a tarot deck and I was curious and took that deck home and just on a whim and just fell in love with it. So that sparked this lifelong obsession with tarot. And, it was I think I read for about 10, 15 years, and then it started turning into a career. And that's what I've done full time now for about 30 years. And I love it. I always say it's the one thing I never get sick of looking at, is those tarot cards.
That is a very relevant thing to say, because tarot is one thing that just doesn't manage to get boring.
Never.
Absolutely. And Shaheen, I don't know anything about your background at all, I'm sorry to say. So I'm sure everybody really, really wants to know.
Yeah, well, my journey with tarot and really the whole mystical world began as a child. I had very mystical experiences where I would see things, feel things, very psychic experiences. And so my mother began teaching me to read tarot, and I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And what she would do is she would lay the cards out and she would say, well, what story do you see? Who's this person? Why are they next to this person? And where are they going? And really what she was trying to accomplish was helping me go into this frame of mind where I could work with my intuition or my psychic abilities. And so from there, I always say tarot to me is like a second language, or symbolism is a second language, because I just love any type of divination, and I love anything that helps us explore our inner world. And so I began working professionally years ago when I was a teenager, and I'm not sure a lot of other people who read tarot or who do this type of work have had this experience, but it's like once you start doing something and people get word of it, it just sort of grows and grows and grows. And that was how I started reading professionally. I started reading for friends and friends' family members, and then the faculty at my school, and then I started doing events, and from there it just sort of took on a life of its own. So, but yeah, for me, I feel tarot is like a second language, and it really is just another facet of my mad love for anything mystical.
Wow. Now, I find that really fascinating, and I'm sure you both can speak to this, because in the tarot community, we have kind of this weird rift between the academic or more traditional style of learning tarot and more intuitive method of learning tarot. And it's really hard to get the community to acknowledge that there is an intuitive method to learning and using tarot. And it sounds like that was kind of your introduction, which is a little bit more rare, Shaheen.
Yeah, it definitely was. And, I think that whole riff is kind of an interesting thing. It's a conversation that I feel like I at least feel I have often with people about how those two things intersect.
And by the way, I want to also add that I never had formal training. When I started tarot reading it and astrology, I was living in a rural area. There was no internet. There were no classes. There were no teachers. There were no mentors. I was pretty much left to my own devices. And my whole way of learning tarot was really through doing it and being intuitive. There weren't that many books that I could get my hands on back then. So I'm definitely more of an intuitive reader, and I'm a very visual person. And, if you're a visual person, you'll find it oftentimes, you see like meanings into everything. And I grew up with a mother who was very, also very intuitive. So all of those experiences really factored into how I developed my reading style. So I would also say I'm definitely not an academic. I am more of a hands-on, learning, intuitive type person.
And you know what I think is so interesting about tarot is that when you start to learn it, regardless of how your training happens, you start to realize that it's a whole world and you want to read and explore and understand it. And and Theresa, I know you do this as well, but it's like you can read tarot cards for 30, 40, 50 years, your whole life, and you can look at the same card over and over again, and that card still can change meanings or offer some new insight. And so I always try to express to people that even if you do take an academic approach, tarot isn't a static thing. It's an ever-growing and evolving tool, and it grows and it evolves with us.
Most definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know, I started reading tarot 30 years ago, and I think that community was very different because, like you were saying, the resources weren't there, and I think the community just accepted an intuitive aspect was going to be involved to a significant degree, where our communities have shifted a lot more, where an academic emphasis is much more expected now. And that's why the intuitive aspects kind of get shunted out of the discussion these days, where before it used to be like, oh, by the way, there is a system, you should probably be vaguely aware of it, but we're mostly running off intuition.
You know what? The one thing I will say, though, in tarot, amongst tarot peers, there tends to be that need for the academic. But when people come to a tarot reader, they don't give a crap about any of that. They don't want to know about your systems. They want to know about the future. So oftentimes when people are coming to us for a reading, they're assuming it's intuitive. They're assuming that we are going to be delivering something not just based on some, system on how these cards go together, but on something we're feeling from the cards.
I totally agree. They don't care how you came about. They just care, is my boyfriend coming back? Is my husband cheating on me? That's what they care about. They don't care.
That's so important. Yeah. They
Absolutely.
Don't care.
I know.
They're there for the information. And it's like going to the doctor or something. Like, you don't need to know all of the ways that someone figures out information. You just want to know that what they're telling you is insightful, accurate, that it resonates with you. And I think unless you're working intuitively, you're never going to, and even people who are academic are going to work intuitively, whether they realize it or not, because unless you're working in that intuitive way, you're not going to have the spontaneity, the freedom, the fluidity that you need to really give a person a reading that doesn't feel like you're just reciting things from a book.
Well, one of the things that I like to say that I want to add to that, Shaheen, is that it's very much like playing an instrument. And, anybody can learn to play an instrument. You can learn the chords, for example, like a guitar. You can learn how to play, different songs. And with enough practice, you can become proficient. But you can do that. But if there's somebody who not only has the skills that they've learned, but they also have the passion and they have the feel for it, it sounds very different.
Right.
You just described how I play music, Theresa. Like, I can read music, I can play a song, but I cannot improvise for anything.
Right. And I grew up, I'm surrounded by musicians, and I have no talent at all. I suck. But when my husband sings, when my son plays the drums, it is a very different experience than, somebody like me who might be able to learn some of those things, but it doesn't have that same intuitive thing, which is, musicians are very intuitive. And it's the same thing with reading tarot. Eventually that intuition is going to kick in, or if it doesn't, you're just going to have what would be the word I want to use? Very mechanical readings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like when a computer does it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's just stock meanings right out of a book that doesn't have context or integration with other cards and that kind of thing.
Or subtle nuances, or the feelings that, that when you get a question from somebody too, there's always like emotion behind it. There's feelings behind it. Well, the same thing happens with the interpretation.
Right.
I'm so glad to have all your experiences. That was not a tangent I expected to go on when we started this at all. And I love the way you guys shared those personal experiences throughout your book. The Tarot for Troubled Times is the book that you guys did together. And throughout the book, in the various chapters and everything, you both share these very personal vignettes of your own life and your own experience throughout. And I really loved that give and take as you went.
Thank you.
And so I love getting that give and take here in the interview as well, because just having those personal moments and personal experiences where you were just like, okay, this is very specifically Theresa's point of view, or this is very specifically Shaheen's experience, was really insightful, and having those real world experiences really helped.
Well, you know, when you're doing a collaboration with somebody, it can sometimes be very, very difficult. But Shaheen, when I met Shaheen a couple of years ago, I knew we had to partner up on something. And working with him was very natural, and we really did a lot of give and take, and it ebbed and flowed and really came together pretty seamlessly, actually, which is probably rare. But, you know, we started this off as a class. That Tarot for Troubled Times was a class first. It just went together so perfectly, and I just have so much respect for Shaheen and his work. And I think that also when you really respect someone that you're working with, that also helps it to become really a magical duo.
I completely agree with that.
That's really amazing to hear, especially that it started as a class to begin with, but also because so many people in the tarot community view each other as competition rather than collaborators.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, the C word, competition. And I always like the C word. Here's what I say. The C word that I use is colleagues, because I don't care what your background is. I don't care if you're way more successful than me or not. We are in this together. And I'm really big on the spirit that we have to support each other, or at least find a way to coexist. And I'm not a competitive person when it comes to any of that stuff. I don't care what anyone else is doing. All I care is what I'm doing and how I'm doing and how I'm making my clients feel. So if somebody else is making 10 times as much money as me or whatever, I don't care. I don't have time for that. And I think that you can get very, very distracted by worrying about somebody else being more successful than you. And, you know, that's a waste of energy. There's plenty of work. I'm always telling people, look, if you like reading cards, we need more good tarot readers, because A, some of us are going to retire, and I'm eyeing it in a few years. And B, there's a lot of people who are looking for very different readers, and, you know, we need more people to enter it. So why would we want to compete when we can't possibly read everybody?
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
And you know, it's so important in the tarot community. I mean, tarot in and of itself is a niche topic, or it's a niche area. But the people that we work with as professional readers come from all different backgrounds. And I think that having unique voices or having distinct voices in the tarot community and people who are really passionate about what they do is important. And, you know, working with Theresa has been such a magical experience, because she is all about collaboration, and you know, there isn't this feeling of competition or a need to do any of that. And I think in the tarot community and the metaphysical community, that competitive side, really, I think it comes from us, and Theresa and I have talked about this before, it comes from us trying to make what we do seem a little bit more legitimate. But that's a whole other topic. But anyways, what I think is, it is definitely important to have those unique voices, and there is nothing to compete. You know, there's no reason to compete. And I think working on this book together was really wonderful, because we have a lot of very similar perspective on things, but we are also different people, and we have a different approach to reading. And I think that what we were able to craft with the book was really wonderful, because we got to bring all of those facets together in a very cohesive way.
For people who are like, let's say, like, they're beginners, or they're not, you know, they're not tarot people, but they find it interesting or whatnot, like, what would they get out of it? Like, would it be like a book for, like, because for me, it's like shadow work. And if they're not, like, let's say they've never picked up a deck, or they've never gotten a reading, would this still be, like, really good for them? Like, I mean, how would you sell it to that, or how would you think that it would be a good thing for them?
It can be a good starting point for some people. If there's somebody maybe who is looking for some healing, they're maybe looking to try to figure themselves out, and they stumble upon this book, they might find that it's something that starts leading them in the direction of maybe using tarot for reflection and using it to help them, do deep healing work, or, if they're interested in activism, that may be a path that leads them to this book. But if you're a real true beginner, I also think it's important that you get a book that is going to, or take a class that is going to really introduce you to the basics. I mean, this book could work for beginners. It can be, again, a gateway, but there are other books that I think that you could start with that might be preferable. Of course, I always tell everybody they should have 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack and Tarot for Yourself by Mary Greer. I mean, those are probably, if you have both of those books, you've got right there everything you need to understand tarot. And Tarot for Troubled Times and many other tarot books, it can help supplement your tarot learning and work on different aspects of tarot, because tarot can be used for so many things. But again, you can start there. You can.
And I think with this book, what we were really clear about when we were writing it was that this wasn't a book on how to read tarot. I mean, there's already a million books about that, and that doesn't mean that there can't be more. But what I think we were really trying to do is, we were trying to open the door on how to use tarot for healing and introspection and really self-care. And so I think whether you're a beginner with tarot or you're a seasoned reader, if you come into this book with an open mind and with the perspective that you're going to use tarot in a way that is empowering versus I'm going to learn how to read tarot cards, then you'll get a lot out of it. Because really it is about shadow work and activism and how to show up in the world for yourself and for other people. And tarot is the bridge for that, which to me is so appropriate, because that's what tarot is in every context of doing a reading. It's a bridge to help empower people with other insight and information and tools.
Well, speaking of, you actually have a specific section towards the end of the book that is all about activism and how tarot can actually help you in your activist work, but not specifically just the tarot aspect, but what activism is and what it means in your life. You both talk in that section about your own experiences in activism.
Well, one of the things that got Shaheen and I creating the class originally was after the last election, there were a lot of, first of all, I just want to preface this by saying after every election, I always have people in my office crying. The losing side, doesn't matter who wins, is going to be thinking their life is over, everything is terrible, it's really dark. And, sometimes it's true, their life really does get affected by things, but every single election, I always end up having to clean up the mess and assure people that they're going to be okay. And with this last election, there seemed to be a lot more people really, really upset. And that is what really actually started our conversation about doing a class on Tarot for Troubled Times. And the other thing that we're dealing with here where I live in Wisconsin, we have an opioid epidemic. And so one of the other things that I've been working with clients is constantly dealing with issues around addiction or grief from loss of a loved one through addiction. So, which is also a very political thing. So, but, that, again, going back to the whole subject of activism, that's what actually began the conversation that started creating the class that led to the book. And I've been activist at a very young age. I got interested in politics. We always discuss politics around the dinner table. Our family's very politically minded. And so it's always been something that I've been interested in, because I believe, no matter what you believe too, I don't care what your belief system is, but you have a say in this world, and you need to have a say in this world. If there is something that you want to fight for, then you do need the tools, and you need to stand up and use your voice for good to go for the things that are going to, help your cause. So I'm a real big believer in activism on some level. Everybody, I think it's your civic duty to do so.
Right. Well, and when Theresa and I started talking about the workshop that we first crafted, it really came from the discussion, not only what's happening politically, but we also talked about how when someone comes for a reading, most of the time they're not coming because they're happy, because things are going really well in their lives. And what I find, and I find this even now when I'm reading for someone, people really have a hard time identifying with so much happening in the world, personally, politically, socially. People have a hard time identifying, how do I show up for myself? Where do I put my focus? Where do I put my energy? And I think with the conversations that we have now about social issues or environmental issues, there is this overarching sense of hopelessness that a lot of people experience, a lot of anguish. And what we wanted to make sure we presented for people was that you can be an activist in so many different ways. And for me, it really comes from, it's less about politics and it's more about humanitarian, humanitarianism, because I think that we are, as Theresa was saying, we're all here and we all have a choice and we all have a voice and we can all do something and we can add to this collective healing work that needs to happen in the world. But it can only happen when people know and feel that they have that choice. And some people don't know. I mean, how many times, Theresa, have you done a reading where you tell someone something because, something shows up and it's really almost like you feel like you're giving that person permission and they didn't need your permission, but just hearing it from somebody else was the confirmation. I feel like that is kind of what we were trying to share with the activism part of the book.
And, I do want to elaborate also to say that tarot is not a passive act. I think there are people that they come to a reading and they think they're just going to be told this is what happens to you. And they don't realize that they have a role in their lives. And tarot will often show you all the possibilities and pitfalls and potential so that you can take control of your life. And it's the same with what's happening out in the world. We often feel like that it's just happening to us, that we're powerless. But if we come together and if we use our voices and really focus on lifting each other up, well, we can make a lot of great changes.
Right. The power of choice truly is the key to creating lasting change. You can't always change the situation that you're in, but you can always make a choice. And I think what you said about tarot being a very active thing, to me, that's so important. When someone comes for a reading, with me at least, what I like to talk with people about is not what's going to happen to them. Not that we don't get into that, but I'm more interested in, okay, what are the things that you're working toward and what's stopping you from getting there right now? And how do we bring all of that together to help you move forward? And I find that that's a very empowering way of going into a reading. And that's like my mantra, empower people, so.
One of the things that I really love that you mentioned in the book is there's a whole section on how to ask a good question. And that is a conversation that we have a lot, not just in our community, but with our clients as well. Just the asking, is this going to happen? Like Maria said a couple minutes ago, is he going to come back? Am I going to get the promotion? That kind of thing. Those are, Maria and I, we both work on the hotlines. And so we do a lot of online readings and stuff. And these are the questions we get. And they make us a little bit crazy because we would both rather see, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maria, but we would both rather see, how am I going to fix this relationship? How am I going to get the promotion? Yes. How do I make these changes?
Yes.
And that's what you discussed a lot in that section. How do you be proactive in making choices? So I was just yes, all of this, what they're saying, to finally see it in print in a book. And I might be behind the times because I don't get, beginner tarot books anymore. Mm-hmm. But to see it, just the way you guys said it in plain language, don't do this anymore, but do this. This is better. This is more constructive, was such a relief to see. Especially as, thank you. But especially as you went into the spreads section, and I have not seen spreads the way you guys laid them out before. Those were some really hard working spreads.
Well, the one thing I will say, I like I like dealing with hard subjects. I really, really love, there's a couple subjects I love talking about with clients. I love doing readings on business. I really get off on that because I have a business-oriented brain. And I love doing readings on hard subjects. I mean, if there is someone in my office talking about grief, or if they are talking about dealing with an addicted, a loved one who's suffering through addiction, or maybe they're suffering with something like that. That's where I love to roll up my sleeves and get to work, because I feel that, tarot and maybe my perspective can help people find really good, healthy ways to deal with their issues. And so I actually am quite comfortable with those subjects. I never shy away from them. Those are the subjects that I, in many ways prefer dealing with.
Those are never discussed in the community, I found. I especially highlighted the moving on from a relationship, like not even fixing it, but like let's leave it behind. And that doesn't apply just to romance, but also family. Yep. Dealing with an addiction yourself, dealing with someone else's addiction, and there's a whole section on creating your own spreads.
Well, and I think that leading up to that part in the book, that's why the shadow work piece is so important, because unless you're willing to face those uncomfortable parts of you, then, really going into those tough spreads or those tough subjects is going to be daunting for people. I think there are different types of people who come to a reading. I think some people come to a reading almost in a magical thinking or a wishful thinking sort of way. And I don't know how many times I've had someone say to me, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear. And it's like, well, I can't wave my magic wand to make it different, but you can. And so what I think we really wanted to stress to people in the beginning part of the book, working our way towards that, was when you start to look at the difficult things, when you start to face the difficult things, when you start to really ask the questions that need to be asked, and just starting right where you are, then you can break through those barriers that you're experiencing. But until you have that flip in perspective, not a whole lot can change, and people aren't going to want to hear that either.
I thought it was really fascinating, too, that in the book, we didn't really dive into the tarot until section 2. It was touched on a little bit before that, but really the first section of the book kind of focuses on what I would consider your basics and your shadow work. And I think that's probably worth saying, because I don't see that in a lot of tarot books. Like, they kind of just assume you already know. So you guys talk about, grounding and centering and cleansing and meditation practices and like getting your spiritual house in order.
Well, that's really important, not just for shadow work, but for tarot readers in general. Because this is something that I say that people don't like to hear either. If you do not have your life in order, if you're not a grounded conduit, that is going to impact the readings that you give to people. So not only is this book, about giving you that advice for that, but that's actually very general advice that anybody who works with tarot, especially if you're going to go pro and you're going to be reading for other people, you've got to make sure you clean your house. You have to work on yourself. You are a constant work in progress, and you have to be the living, breathing example of how this stuff really is working.
Right. And, when you get into that seat as a professional reader, you never know what you're going to face. You never know what type of questions a person's going to throw at you. And so I think that level of self-awareness is very important. You need to, I don't like this concept of you need to be like healed or something before you can help people. I think that's not helpful at all, but you need to be a few steps ahead, or you at least need to have a working relationship with your tools, and having all of that helps you navigate the terrain that you're going, that you're facing with a client. Because sometimes what I find, and just jumping backwards a little bit, a person will ask a question like, when is he coming back? And sometimes for me, like, I'm not going to say, well, hey, that's not really a helpful question. It's like, maybe let's start there. And what we do is we start looking at the question under the question until we unravel something. But without having that working knowledge and personal experience doing that with myself. I wouldn't be able to do that with a client.
Oh yeah, and I agree with that so much because I'm always working on myself. My friend Diane Bloom, she's an amazing crystal healer, and she said to me one time, this really impacted me, and we put it in the book too. She said, "Everybody needs therapy because everybody had a childhood." I'm like,
Yeah.
it's such a brilliant statement. So, we always, as readers and healers, we have to work on ourselves. And if you are diving into tarot, you've got to really work on those dark spots. You've got to go in there. You've got to embrace that shadow, and you've got to really take good care of yourself, because that's going to allow you to live your best life. And that's also going to allow you to help others more fully.
And I've seen people that are tarot card readers that don't do that don't do the work on themselves. And they end up really burning out because they just take on so much of, like, from their own lives and then from their clients, and they just lose it.
Yeah, they burn out, or they do damage.
Yeah, exactly. I had a woman that was actually screaming at me one time because she was like, "How dare you not answer your client like right away?" And I was like, "Because I have a life, and I can't be on call and present and, on with them 24 hours a day. I can't hold their hand. That's not good for me and not good for them in the end." And she's like, "Well, no, I always do it." And I'm like, "And that is why you're not okay." And she was like, "How dare you say that?" I'm like, "No, you're not. You're just not." And
yeah, our self-care has to be primary.
And even if someone isn't intending to be a professional tarot reader, like, you have to have something solid and sturdy as a foundation to build on.
Yep.
And you don't want to be, like, digging around in all the muck and grime and stuff that has built up over the years if you don't have a solid place to do that from. Or you're just going to send yourself into, like, a weird roller coaster that's not fun.
Yeah, that's so true. That is, and it's the one thing I say about this work too. We're always absorbing energy. So, even if you're not a professional, everything is made out of energy. We're all made out of atoms. We are absorbing it all the time, and this is why you have to take such good care of yourself, especially when you are doing readings. You have got to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, and you've got to have a way to discharge that energy too.
Absolutely, and I was blown away that you included that as the first section of this book, because I have not read, and again, I haven't been over beginner books in a long time, but I have not seen any tarot books that cover that specifically, and I've always wondered why not.
That's a good question.
It feels essential, so I was surprised but relieved to see it here.
I think it's mainly because people assume that you already get that. Like this person's just gonna get that, and no. Some people have to, like, be led by their, like children, be like, here, this, it's okay to do this, or remember to do this first, And
I also think too that the way that we, Theresa and I live this, like, this is our lives. We do it professionally, and not just reading tarot, but all of these different aspects of it. And I think what I always try to express to people is that tarot and the things that I share with my clients and the things that I share in the writing that I do, I'm trying to share a practice with people, a way of life with people. Tarot isn't just something that you do, it's not just it's not a parlor trick. I mean, it can be. And I think that we're evolving in this genre in a way where it's no longer this fun pastime that you do on Halloween or something. But now it's something that really enriches people's lives. And something that I will say that has changed over the years, that I've started to have clients who do come and they'll say, "Oh, I've been getting that card a lot," or "That was the card that came up for my, year card," or something, where what I'm realizing is people are wanting to incorporate this into their lives. And I think that's what people are getting a little taste of when they're learning how to do the things like that we discussed in Tarot for Troubled Times, like calculate the birth card and the year card. They're seeing how tarot can show up and give them insight in a way that is a little bit different than the expectation or what the general population or mainstream media tells us.
I actually wanted to ask you guys about what you thought of the year card for 2020 coming up.
The Emperor?
Yes.
It's very fascinating. We talked about this a few times.
I wondered, I haven't actually had a chance to listen to any of your other interviews, but I can't imagine this is not a hot topic.
It's a very hot topic because the Emperor, the good side of the Emperor can be that everybody's taken care of. It's very paternal. It's like it's protecting people. And so if there is somebody who is going to be like out in the world as a leader, if they are operating from that perspective, it can do a lot of good to restore order and security. However, the shadow side of the Emperor is the dictator. And that is what we have to be careful that we're not slipping into dictatorship.
Yes. And when we did the original workshop that this class, or that the book is based on, we actually took a couple of political figures and looked at them to calculate not only looking at the year card, but their birth cards. And so it's interesting that you see those patterns. And we did a workshop when the book first came out where we talked about, did we calculate it in class or did somebody else? But we looked at a couple of the different candidates that are running and looked at what their year cards were going to be. And wasn't there somebody that had the Emperor as their year card? Do you remember, Theresa?
Yes, I do remember. Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, that's his birth card.
Oh, that's his birth card. As the Emperor card, I don't remember now off the top of my head. I forgot.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know there were a couple of, so that was the interesting thing to look at is that like Donald Trump, his birth card was the Emperor, and now we're going into an Emperor year. Now, I don't know what that says, but...
I was going to literally ask you what that says.
Well, I think that, so again, I think that the tarot gives us an invitation to make choices. So we know we're going into a year card that is, we're going into a year that's based around this idea of, power, authority, all of that. And so we have to make choices as individuals that either uphold that in a balanced way or a disproportionate way. And so I think we would have to do a little bit more digging to see if there's a correlation between it being Donald Trump's birth card and it being the year card, but that might be for another show.
Well, speaking of the candidates running, you do have a section in the book that I was really fascinated on. That it's a very small section, but it was labeled "How to Run for Office." Mm-hmm. And I was kind of taken aback because, like I said, my mother was a tarot reader. I grew up reading tarot and doing metaphysics and all that. And now I'm a pagan witch, and I thought, no, I'm an impossible. That's never gonna be a thing, right? Like this society is never. I barely when I was a teenager felt like it was okay to say it to other people without having my house burned down. So the idea of running for office ever is just a wild, crazy impossibility in my brain. But then again, on the other hand, there's Marianne Williamson out there. Mm-hmm. So, so kind of curious about whether or not you think that's actually a real do you guys think we're really getting into an era where a metaphysician or New Ager could possibly really run for office and have that be viable?
Well, I'm just going to say that any good politician or business person has a good tarot card reader in their pocket. So
they should.
That doesn't mean that they are, because tarot readers have famously served politicians. Tarot readers and astrologer. That's kind of a long-standing thing. That's, as far as I know, has gone. I know JFK had an astrologer. So, but could an astrologer or tarot reader really actually run for office themselves successfully?
Not for some time.
I agree. I think, and you brought up Marianne Williamson. I think she's a phenomenal writer. I love a lot of what she advocates. And I think that, hearing people talk about her message and the things that she's shared has been interesting because I've heard people who I did not think would be receptive to what she's saying be like, oh, I really love what she has to say. And then people who I thought would really love it who didn't. And I think we are not completely there yet, but I think we are moving in a direction where that language is more acceptable. I mean, think about how many people now will say things like, oh, that's a message from the universe, or, put it out there for the universe. I mean, that has become common language. It's something that people use all the time, and it doesn't have a religious connotation. And so I think we're moving into a time where we can be more open about it, but I agree with Theresa. It would be a long time before I think, the president would be like, well, we're moving into, Scorpio season. And so
we will not be going to the talks because it's just not astrologically good. The planets should not align correctly. Yeah, it would be a while.
Mercury's in retrograde.
Mercury's in retrograde. We can't sign any contract. Maybe after the 5th, because then it'll be like upright and like, oh my God. That'd be awesome.
But, if you think about Obama as a president and the language he used and the way that he moved through the world, I mean, that was a very different thing. Mm-hmm. Now, it's just it's not a big deal to us because it happened. But when he was first elected, that was a whole new thing. It was uncharted territory. And so, but I do think that section, I don't think what we were trying to propose was that people who are tarot card readers, need to go and run to be president, but that you can be active in your community, your country. You can be active in a political sense if you want to be, and you have the tools that you can get there. Because, I mean, imagine how powerful a woke leader is, versus someone who's not.
Right. And I do love the idea that, like, a metaphysician or a new age or tarot reader or whatever, you would have to have an unsuccessful run probably before you could have a successful one.
Right.
And office doesn't have to be presidential. That could be a mayor too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, it just said how to run for office. So I thought that was like, it shocked me is what I'm saying. Like, you rocked my world.
Good. Well, that's a good thing.
Yes, I agree. I was just like, this is not a thing I have ever even considered. Wow.
And we want for people who are reading, hopefully little baby tarot card readers are going to read this book and think, oh, I'm really good at reading tarot cards and I might want to run, for office in some capacity. At least for me, I want for people to understand that even if you are living, doing things that are more fringe or, or a niche or something, that those can help add to bigger things that you're doing out in the world.
And also the other thing that we have to realize is, I'm from a different generation than Shaheen. My generation, I'm a Generation Xer, and the baby boomers are right above us. And, a lot of them are still, a little bit closed off to some of this ways of thinking. But the younger generation is really, really into things like tarot and astrology and crystals. I mean, amongst millennials, and my children are both millennials, and around my nieces and nephews who are, I don't know what generation they are, what the name would be, but they are all really, really into this sort of stuff. So I think when the younger generation begins stepping up and taking these roles in government, we might be looking at something very different.
Oh,
yeah. And I think I look at it from that perspective. I mean, like you said, I'm from a different generation. As a millennial, these kind of things don't seem as weird to me. And I noticed that, I went to design school, and I realized even then that even though people were not necessarily creatives, were interested in the mystical, and they didn't need to know how does it work. They were just interested in the fact that it did something. And I think we're moving away from needing to justify all of these things and just incorporating it into our lives.
And the other thing I want to add to that too, and I always like to say it like this, back in the day, but back in the day when I started reading professionally, we're looking at 30 years ago, it was very different. I mean, I had people threatening to beat me up for even having the audacity to read cards in a public venue. And it's not like that anymore. Yes, I have some. Let me tell you, I've got some really good tarot horror stories from back in the day about terrible experiences I've had, from people who had a very ignorant view about it and didn't understand it and were really quite cruel and rude. And nowadays, if I tell someone I'm a tarot reader, like, oh my God, how cool. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. My parents were so embarrassed back then, they wouldn't even tell people what I did for a living.
Yes, I'm not kidding when I say that, like, I used to legit be scared that people would burn our house down.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I also wanted to remark, too, that I was shocked to see the whole section on magic.
Well, magic is, I think, for tarot people, we all love our little magical stuff. I mean, tarot is magic.
Yes. Well, and again, there's this underlying message in the book of, being able to take ownership of your life, to be proactive. And I think that magic is so fascinating in the context of tarot because when you incorporate the two, it instills into people this idea that you're not going to get a reading and it's this passive thing where someone's going to tell you this is going to happen to you. So just shut up and, go on about your business and just watch for the signs. It really puts you in a place where you can do something with it. And I mean, that's what's so wonderful about the topic of magic. And, for me, when I look at the cards, I'm always looking for things that can be incorporated into the reading that are action steps. So, and for a lot of people, I think ceremony and magic and spiritual practices are helpful. Like if I'm talking to someone and, going back to how do I, make this relationship work? And we pull the Ace of Wands. I'm like, oh, maybe you should light a candle, and fill that with an intention and desire.
Mm-hmm. I find this chapter really exciting because I know we've discussed it on the podcast before, Heather, Marie, and I, about how there's this weird separation again between like the New Age community and the witchy community, where like a lot of people in the New Age community are like, oh no, we don't do magic. That's all evil. We don't cross that line. And so I love seeing you two breaking this barrier.
Well, we are a little bit rebellious, and also we really wanted this book to be a handbook for people, with all the tools that we can give them that have helped us, so it isn't just about just being just another tarot book. We want it to be a handbook. And I love breaking down barriers and stuff like that because, I love magic. I love tarot. I love astrology. I love chanting. I love yoga. Why do we have to keep things separate? We really don't. We can bring it all together and find ways to groove on it together.
Mm-hmm. I actually was doing a reading recently, and it was with a woman that I've worked with many times, and we were talking about her being in this difficult, coming out of a difficult relationship, and she said, what should I do about it? And I flipped over the devil card, and my first thought was, I said to her, I was like, well, do you want like a ceremony or something to do? And I looked at the devil card, and I looked at the two, the man and the woman on either side of the devil, and I thought, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, you should burn image candles, one of you, one of him. And when I said to her, she was like, that was the first thing I thought when I looked at that card. She was like, that just came to me, and it just felt so exciting, like I needed to do that. And she had never done anything like that before. And just seeing how that lit up, how she lit up hearing that, and just how that came together, to me, that was just like, yeah, this is what you need to do.
Are you two finding that clients are more receptive to that kind of advice?
I would say my clients, probably there's a portion that would never be open to something like that. Because I do read for a lot of people who are, very conservative. And the idea of doing something like that may not be open, but talking to them about something like prayer or, positive thinking, if I sense that they're not open to doing something like a ritual, that's going to help. I mean, I got to like also say I grew up Catholic, so Catholic, the Catholic religion is the most occult religion of all. There's all this chanting and you're lighting a candle to this saint or that saint. And, so that kind of stuff is oftentimes a way if somebody's not comfortable talking magic, there are other ways that you can still be doing magic in your life.
And I find the same thing. I mean, I have a lot of clients now, especially people who I've worked with for a long time, and they've come to know me and how I move through the world. So they're a little bit more open to those things. But for me, one of the important things about being a tarot reader or doing intuitive work in any way with people is understanding the importance of language. And so, like, for example, in that story that I just told, if I was sitting with a different client, that I knew wasn't really open to those kind of things, I might have saw something different in that card, in comparison to the question. And I probably would have went about talking about that a little bit differently, just because I find that when you present something to people in a way that they can understand, in language that they can understand, a lot of times they're very open to it, So I might not say, yeah, light a candle and do a spell, but I might, like Theresa, say, maybe use this affirmation or this prayer or, and so again, I think incorporating all of those things into this book allows people to see different ways that can happen.
I found the way that you guys presented magic to be extraordinarily approachable. It wasn't like straight up witchcraft, and you went about it saying, like, you don't have to be a witch, you don't have to be a magician, you don't have to be all these other things. Magic just is, and the simplest form of magic is candle work, and it can just be a simple prayer. And I think that for me, that was the way that I was introduced to magic myself. So it felt very familiar and it felt very safe.
Yeah, well, I was introduced to magic again through the Catholic religion, because I mean, it really was all magic is what we were doing. You don't think of it like that, but it is. I mean, we were always lighting candles for this one and that one. And I mean, what are you doing right there? I mean, you are trying to petition a saint to do some favor for you, to find a lost thing, to sell a house. When my father, when we had to sell his house, when he got wasn't able to take care of it, I had a feng shui expert come in the house and go through the house and change energy, because the house wasn't selling and nothing was happening. And finally I said, damn it, I'm going to get St. Joe. I went and got St. Joe, buried it upside down in the yard facing the house, gave him some food to work on while he was there. We sold the house in 2 weeks.
Wow.
What is that? That is magic. I mean, it may, and I had to laugh later. I said, of course, that's what you had to do. Your dad's Catholic. That's going to be something that's resonating for his house.
Right.
But it's no different than me here lighting a candle today for peace. It's no different. It's just we're using it in a different, whatever, under a different guise. That's all.
Right. We're just calling it different things, but it's all the same stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love, like, when I've had the chance to go to Mexico and see how that Catholicism has turned into there's so many folk aspects to it, and people aren't questioning the validity of things or if they're really biblical or whatever, but it's like this, it's really tapping into that bone gut knowing and just kind of doing something, putting that energy, setting energy into motion through some means that makes sense to you. So
this book, like, going front to back, was really kind of an evolution, because you take us through building that spiritual foundation, and then we walk through all the shadow work, and all the journal prompts are pretty intense. And then we start working with the tarot, and we have the different, you guys actually go over the meanings of all the tarot cards in brief. And then we have the tarot spreads to work with. And then we enter into, kind of the brief primer on magic, and then activism, and then setting up altars for social change. I mean, that's an incredible journey to go through in the course of the book. And it's really just just a beautiful kind of evolution. And I think like what you were saying earlier, like it's friendly for beginners, but it's probably not your primer. But this is a totally different way of using the tarot than I've seen it presented before.
Yeah, it may not be totally beginners, but again, it could still be helpful. It's really helpful for anybody who's trying to do some healing work.
Yeah, I agree.
That is probably the best way to, like, if your focus is really healing, and especially because like a lot of people start out in tarot questioning whether or not they can use it for themselves. I think this book really addresses how to do that.
Yeah, and I actually did a talk a couple weeks ago where I talked about shadow work, and I talked about the tarot birth card. And what I found after that talk was that there were a lot of people who had never even considered tarot as a tool for healing or introspection. They had not considered any of it in that way. And in my mind, I'm like, really? That's like what tarot is to me.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found is that opened up a door for a lot of people, and they were really interested in working with tarot in that way, and working with the concepts in the book, because they saw a different angle or a different aspect of tarot that had not been presented to them before. And that truly, it makes me so happy, because I want people to see the multifaceted way that tarot can be used. And
I agree with you. For me, like, if you don't start out using it for yourself, it seems weird and unnatural. But I guess that's the question I see most often in the tarot community is like, can you read for yourself? And there's so many people who say no.
Oh my God, that's how I started out. I mean, because who knows you better than you?
Mm-hmm.
Right, like, and who else are you going to read for? You're just going to walk around being like, I don't know how to do this. Can I do it to you?
Yeah, and I mean, back in the day, when I started out, I was like 15 years old. Who the heck is going to let a 15-year-old read for them? I had to start somewhere. I started reading for myself.
Yes, I love that this like really drives home that like these are some amazing ways you can read for yourself.
Yeah,
like, let's not even be confused.
I love that.
I have like a million other questions, but are you guys still doing the class?
At this point, no, but it may come back. We don't know yet.
Okay, because I'm feeling after like the exit polls in the UK tonight that it might be desperately needed again.
Yeah, that was not a good. People are very, very unhappy, but I'm sure there's a lot of people also that are very happy right now because they're getting what they want.
Such is the way of the world.
Yep, and it's always like that. It doesn't matter, again, who wins, who loses. There's always going to be somebody unhappy, and hopefully we can, through our work, help them to move past that.
Where can everyone follow up on what you guys are currently doing? I know you have a website. I'm not familiar with your website, Shaheen. Are you guys both writing articles constantly on those, and where are those?
So my website is ShaheenMiroInsights.com, and I write articles, blog posts there. You can find out about my other publications and how to book a private session with me. And I also do a lot on social media, so predominantly Instagram, and I write lots of things on there and share videos and photos and really just try to engage with people around these concepts that we've been talking about.
And you can find me at thetarotlady.com. And I do a lot of communicating with people, a lot of teaching through my website. I have a lot going on my blog. I also have a couple podcasts, including Tarot Bites and Astrology Bites. I do a little business podcast also with my friend Bree Saucy. So I've got a lot of things going on, and the blog is where most stuff is happening.
And I think your like astrology planner for the year just renewed, didn't it?
The AstroBiz Digest is a subscription service that I have for people who want to use astrology for their business. And I gotta confess something too. I've been doing astrology for a long time, but years ago I started using it for my business, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I'm interested in. I don't care about doing someone's birth chart. I want to know how to use this to my advantage so I'm not swimming upstream. Mm-hmm. And when I began applying astrology to my business, it was really kind of crazy and uncanny how well it worked. So I've been doing that for years with my own business. So I developed the AstroBiz Digest to pretty much show people this is how I follow the planets. And when you work with the planets, I'm telling you, it really, speaking of magic, it's magic. It's all about learning how to work with the energy. And, you can work with the energy for your personal life, but you can also work with it for your business. And it works.
So I know I've been following you forever, Theresa. And it wasn't until you released your AstroBiz Digest that I even discovered that you were into astrology, even longer than tarot.
Yep, that was my first love.
I felt like such a dummy for not even knowing that.
Well, I'm known as the tarot lady, so a lot of people don't associate me with astrology. But, what's really funny is one of the most popular features on my blog is my little monthly forecast, which I've been doing forever. So the astrology is actually very popular. And, the people who work with me for business astrology, they're very passionate about it. The people who love it really love it. And then there's some people who they come into business astrology and they're kind of like, they don't get it. It's too much. It's too granular. And they will end up moving off. But for those of us who know it works and who apply it, applied astrology is really pretty bloody amazing.
That is fantastic. I have no idea how astrology works, but I know people swear by it.
I swear by it. I use astrology every day of my life. Every single day of my life, I use astrology.
Wow. And I know, Shaheen, you grew up very magical. Like, not just New Age, but like full-on magic.
I did. I've had that as part of my life for so long. It's just second nature.
And I'm so excited, because you have just been showing up all over my social media feeds, the last 6 months, going big. And I'm so excited to be seeing you more and more and learning more about you. And I hope that continues nonstop.
Well, thank you so much. I hope so too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will include your links on this podcast. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the We Witches 3 podcast. For show notes and links, please go to www.wewitches3.com.